Hi, Hunter Hastings here. Today we're going to talk about small business. And anybody who listens to the podcast regularly knows that I don't like that term. It sounds limiting and restrictive and maybe even demeaning. We're going to talk to a guest today who associates with small business terms like big opportunity, big thinking, big success. And that's because small businesses often can, and sometimes must, perform better than big businesses. They have to move faster. They have to be more innovative. They have to have the latest technology. They can educate big business about what's possible because they have specialized expertise and specialized experience that they can bring to big business and improve big business's operations or performance or abilities in some selected area.
This is the Value Creators Podcast. Value creation is the sole purpose of any business and every business, and for all of us as entrepreneurs. Listen to great value creators as they share their successes, trials, and lessons learned. Join us as we explore how to think as value creators, how to act as value creators, and how to view business through the lens of value creation.
Cynthia Kay is the CEO of CK & Co. That's a video production business, which we'll learn about, and is very, very, very successful. She's also a great consultant and advisor to other small businesses. She gives a lot of consulting advice. She makes talks. She does workshops. And so we're going to learn from her what her coaching is for small business. Cynthia, welcome to the Value Creators Podcast.
Well, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
People call you CK and they call you Cynthia. Which do you prefer?
Well, they call me CK.
CK, okay. CK it is. So you're a champion of small business. We're going to talk about that. You've got great ideas about small businesses, big success, big opportunity, think big. And we love that. I hate the term small business because I think it tends to be demeaning, but you don't think that way. So we're going to explore that. But you're also a small business owner yourself. You're in the video business, a leading high-edge, super high-quality video production and video services business. So we'll talk about how you expanded and grew it. And then we'll talk about your advice and guidance for small business in general. So thank you for doing that for us. Let's start with CK & Company, your video business. I always like to start with the backstory, how you got started, how you got into it, and how you got to where you are today, just in a kind of potted version. Then we'll go into the details.
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about that. Well, I actually started in broadcasting. So I worked in that industry for about 13 and a half years. And the last station that I worked at it for 6.5 years and 4 different owners. And that can tell you a little bit about what that experience was like. And I got fired. That's a whole other story, but very common in broadcasting, and had to make a decision. Do I start something? Do I go find a job at another TV station? And honestly, I, like so many small business owners, wanted to bet on myself. I wanted to build something and create jobs for people. And so I took that leap and started the business, and honestly have never looked back since.
What was that decision like? And was it tension-ridden? Was it a happy step forward? How did you feel about it at the time? Do you recall?
Yeah, I actually do. And so my father was a small business owner, and I grew up watching him as a small business owner. And frankly, I always thought I would own a small business. I just didn't think I'd do it at that point in my life. But I remember my dad saying to me, "Honey, do you know what you're doing?" And I went, "Yes, Dad, I do, because I've watched you." And I honestly wasn't scared. I mean, there were aspects of it that scared me, but when you think about it, who would you rather bet on? Would you rather bet on someone else, or would you rather bet on yourself? And I chose to bet on myself.
Did you start with clients or did you start from scratch? You had to go and find clients from nowhere.
That's a great question, because I had dabbled in freelancing a little here and there. I'd done some things. So I actually did have some ideas of where to find clients and how to take what today might be called a side hustle and turn it into a business. But I started with people that I knew. I made a lot of cold calls. I reached out to my network, and I started working out of my home. So that made it a little bit less scary because I didn't have that overhead to start with. And that made it somewhat easier.
Was there a big capital investment to begin with, CK? I know when I made some videos in my office here and they arrived with giant suitcases full of cameras and audio and cables and stands. And is there a lot of capital involved?
Absolutely. And I did what they tell you not to do, which is I signed a note, a second mortgage on my house to take out a loan so that I could buy the equipment to get us started. You know, a lot of times they advise you not to do that. But I think when you're starting a business, you look at where can you get money? And this is a very capital intensive business. And in fact, every year we are spending, because just look at technology, look at what has happened to it. So every year we're buying equipment and getting rid of old systems and putting new systems in. So it is one of those kinds of businesses, but a lot of smaller entities don't have as much capital investment. And so it's easier for them to get started.
Yeah, especially these days when you can download a lot of things from the internet, and that's how you get your capital. Yeah, yeah. So we'll get to that continued pace of technological change. 'Cause I read in one of your books, you said in your business, it feels like it changes every 2 months. There's new technology and new software and new equipment, right?
Constantly, constantly. You cannot be change adverse and be in my business.
So one of the things we often find with small businesses as they grow and they get bigger and more sophisticated, there's some big leaps, there's some big events, or you get a big client, or there's some kind of breakthrough. Did you have any stair-step experiences like that where you made great leaps forward, or was it gradual growth?
Well, we actually had a number of them. And one was somewhat early on in the business. And I use this as a lesson for other businesses. We got an opportunity. There was a large manufacturer that had some smaller subsidiaries, and they had a supplier, and they had a need for a video. And their current supplier told them the project was too small. They didn't want it. And that opened the door for us to go in. And we did a very small project for this company, but they liked us so well that they got us on an RFP list for a huge project. And we ended up being able to produce a monthly communication for that company for almost 30 years. So think about it. That one opportunity just catapulted us. And I've had other opportunities like that where we've just had the opportunity to walk in the door and provide some advice. And because of the way we approached it, we were able to get other large opportunities. That's quite frankly how I won Siemens Industry as a big client. I had the chance to give them some advice, and before I knew it, I was on an RFP list.
Yeah. So hidden in there, or not so much hidden, but part of that is that you're a small business in quotes, but your clients are big businesses. And you write about that a lot, that there's a huge opportunity for small businesses to supply big business, but there's a lot of demands there. Can you talk to us about that a little bit? You talked about understanding the big business perspective.
I think that smaller entities, and by the way, small business isn't always small. I think we have to remember that, but by definition, I think there are some companies that are afraid to pursue bigger opportunities. And big is different for everyone. Let's say that. But what I've discovered is that larger entities really value what a smaller, nimble company can bring to them. They love that we're very responsive and we're very flexible. We don't have tons of attorneys going through every single provision of something that slows up the process. As smaller entities, I think we bring a fresh perspective that larger companies really appreciate. Now, do you have to jump through hoops? Absolutely, because there are things that they demand. But I think if you're not at least looking at those opportunities, you're missing out.
What is their perspective? We've come across procurement committees and budget committees and, escalating up to the C-suite if you've got a big budget. Do you work hard at understanding their perspective?
Absolutely. I have had the opportunity to have some really wonderful conversations with buyers and procurement agents. And I've asked them, tell me what it is that you need. And one of the things that they always point to is the fact that they need to be educated. They want to be educated about what you can provide them. And they will sometimes actually tell you, we're not experts in buying all of these things. So, for example, maybe you have a category buyer that's great at buying raw materials, but they don't know how to buy video production services. So then my job is really to help educate them about the service we provide. They want me to tell them ways that we could streamline the process, or we could help them get this wonderful project, but also be able to do some additional things for the budget. So I think what you have to do is, from the perspective of the big business buyer, you have to create the relationship, and they do want the relationship. They want you to come in and help them, and then educate them about what you can do for them and why buying from you is, even if, and not that price is not important, but you might even have a price that is a little bit more, but the value of what you're bringing them can be a real plus.
Yeah. So talking about education then, video is a business tool that's changed a lot very, very quickly to your earlier point. I mean, it's everywhere now. It's a standard way of communicating, but there are times when it was not. Did you educate your client businesses on how to use video? Is that part of your service?
That is actually something we're doing daily. I think often what happens is people will come to us and they'll say, oh, I have this problem here. I'm trying to recruit talent, for example, and I need a video for that. And I will often say to them, gee, that's great. But do you know that while creating that, you can feature your people and create externally facing videos that show your customer the people who are making their product? And it's a different way of thinking. But today, what we know is that first, a lot of people don't read. I mean, that's just a fact. Some of it is device driven. They're looking for content on a little phone, right? And so it's easier to watch a video than maybe read tiny print. There are some things that lend themselves so well to video, things where there's movement or under listening to a customer talk about something. I mean, there's just endless opportunities. So both internally and externally, there are opportunities to create videos, and some cross both of those spectrums.
I find that fascinating that it's both internal and external communication. They're both intertwined. You just gave me an idea that you can do both in one fell swoop, right? You can
But you
create
have to plan it. You do have to plan it. That's where the pre-production and the planning of it, because if you're there and you're talking to an employee about why they love to work at your company, and then you can say, tell me how you feel about making this product. Well, there you go. You've just leveraged that opportunity to shoot that video.
Yeah. So that gets me to the point of how you grew your business. I mean, grew the scope of the business. So I go to your website and I see that you do production, obviously. You do post-production, you do animation, you do storytelling, as you call it, and you do consulting, video consulting. So you've expanded your scope. Is that because clients asked you those questions, or was it your pre-planning that got you there?
Well, sometimes it's a little bit of both.
Yeah.
I will admit that sometimes it's a little bit of both. Here's one example. So I have 4 FAA certified drone pilots on my staff. And part of that is Clients kept asking us as we were traveling all over the country, can you get a beautiful drone shot of our building? Well, for us to go find people in all of these places that we were at across the country or to take someone is an added cost. But if we could provide that as an add on service and we can do that with the existing people who are already shooting video, that's a new service. But a lot of the services that we have expanded, for example, animation, After Effects, motion graphics, that was driven by us going to customers and saying, here's some ways that we could use this service to help you better get your message across. The one thing I will caution business owners about is it's great to say to a customer, would you use this service? But you have to have that follow up question that says, are you willing to pay for this service? Because everyone will tell you, oh, that would be great if you could do that. But are they willing to pay for it? And what are they willing to pay for? So I think when you're thinking about adding new services, and over the years, as we have grown up, we now have graphic design on staff. And that was another service that we said, we could improve the quality of what we're doing if we had a graphic designer on staff. And so I think it has to be a little bit of both. You have to listen to what your clients want, but you also have to nudge them. You've got to push them a little in that direction.
Yeah, we call that teaching clients what they can want. They sometimes don't know what they want, and they don't even know what they can want. They didn't know about drones, or they didn't know about visual designs. I'm so glad you said that. And also, I'm so glad you said willingness to pay. That's one of our formulations. So marketing often talks about identifying a need. That's fine, but it's willingness to pay, which is the crucial transition, right?
Yes, because you don't want to do it for free.
Do your clients have a good concept of what great video costs? I often find that they don't know.
It's interesting. There are formulas that they've heard about, where, they might say to me, I understand the formula is $1,000 per minute. Well, that formula really doesn't work because I could set up a camera and shoot a minute of video, and that's very cheap. Or I can create an amazing 1-minute sizzle video where we've gone and, to multiple locations and lots of graphics and animation, and the cost of that is very expensive. But I think what we always have concentrated on is value and looking at things as an investment. Because when you create things at a good, high quality level, you often can use those assets in other ways. And I think that's what we're really good at, is showing people you did this shoot, but look at, you've told a video case study about this company, but look at these things we can pull out for social media, or look at some of these things that we can use to train someone about this. So I think I spend a lot of time, and I think a lot of good business owners do this, helping educate people, because I know I certainly need education in some of the areas that are not my specialty, legal issues, accounting issues, insurance. I mean, there are areas where I don't have expertise, and I expect those people to educate me, but then I need to educate people on what we do.
Yeah, we sometimes call that functional knowledge. You have functional knowledge that they don't have, and then it's a great value to share that. You mentioned the term value there, CK. Do you calculate that for the client? Do you try to put a number on it? Use the ROI of doing this, or do you let them calculate that from your value education?
I try not, you can't know everything about a client's business. What I can tell you is we've created videos, one in particular early on, where we created a video that probably cost around $10,000. And this customer got a global service contract worth millions of dollars. So I can calculate the value of that easily. There are other things that I think it's not as easy to calculate it. But I think anecdotally, people can. It's, is someone saying, wow, that video you created to show me how to do X, this training, I didn't have to send someone out of state to go do that, or, you brought it to me. So I think there are some ways you can calculate the value. And I think some of it, especially with things that are more big picture, aesthetic, kind of think pieces, I think those are maybe harder to calculate what that value is.
The standard business literature says you're going to be the best at what you do. Can you be the best in video production, or is the best fit for your client's need, or is the best relationship? How do you think about being the best?
Wow, that's an interesting question. Well, I think we always aim to be the best. And I think one of the things that we look at is, at least in our world, is the best within a particular category and cost range. Because if you give someone $100,000 and ask them to produce something, and you give someone $10,000 and ask them to produce it, they will be best in different ways, right? But what I will tell you is most of my customers will say that they get a lot more from what we deliver than people who charge them significantly more dollars. And I think that is one of the ways that we show people how to make the most of their money. And I think that's a huge selling point if you can educate people. And the other thing that is important is you have to look at the organization. There are some organizations that I'll use an example my lawyer used with me. You can over lawyer someone or under lawyer them. You can send in a really high priced, sophisticated lawyer who's doing a simple job. Why would you do that? You want that person who is perhaps less skilled, but skilled in that area, right? So what we try to do is say, and we have people on our staff at various levels of expertise, we assign the best team for that project. That's how we work it.
Yeah. I like that perspective. We're the best at getting the most out of the budget that you've got.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great value proposition.
And sometimes the simplest creative and not particularly expensive can be the most dramatic. That's what the challenge is.
Yeah, but you've got to have the imagination to see that.
Absolutely.
Let's go to the other side of this proposition, CK. You're an expert on small business generally because you've been a great small business owner. You've written books. You give a lot of consulting. You give a lot of talks. So I'm trying to segue into how you give advice for small business. I'm not really sure where to start, so maybe you can help me. What are the kinds of problems that you're solving for small business? That might be a place to start this thread.
Sure. Well, I think one of and I learned this from my father as well. One of my values has always been to try and pay it forward, because there were people who helped me when I was starting out. And, without their help, I could have spent a lot more time and money doing things, but I managed to move through it quickly. So one of the things that I have done is become very involved both on the statewide and the national level with small business associations. So in Michigan, the Small Business Association of Michigan, and I'm a former board chair of the National Small Business Association. And in that work, I've spent a lot of time with business owners from around the country. And what's fascinating to me is that even though they're in very, very different industries and verticals, we all have a lot of the same problems. And we think we're unique, but many of the problems that we have are very similar. For example, how do you grow? How do you grow your business? How do you scale a business? When do you hire people? When's the right time to hire people? How do you build a great team of internal and external advisors? These are all problems that we all have. And so I think, at least from the perspective of working with businesses, I have done a lot of roundtables. I've spoken, I've written books. I have a book coming out in May. But I feel like, and it's not just my expertise, it's the expertise of other business owners, but I feel like bringing people together, when you bring entrepreneurs together and just let them go, the conversations are amazing. They help each other solve those issues. Here's what I did. Try this. And so I think that's one of the things that I've always tried to do is identify some of those issues and then write about those issues and get different perspectives on it so that people can listen to what I say and also what other people say.
Well, one of the things I love about the many wonderful things in your books and your website is that small business is special. It's not just a scaled down version of big business, which is one line that you use. And it's not smaller because it's dumber, which is,
It's not.
another great quote. But it requires big thinking to be a good small business owner. So tell us your perspective on that.
Well, I think there's a few strategies that I like to talk about when you're thinking about growing a small business. And one I kind of alluded to earlier, that story I told you about doing that small job that catapulted us. So I think when you're a larger entity, what you're doing is you're feeding the machine. You're constantly feeding the machine. As a smaller business, you get to do a far more targeted look. So I like to say things like, pay attention to small customers because they get bigger. That's a strategy where you can test out your skill in this smaller setting, learn from that, iterate, grow it, grow it, grow it. I think that's one of the strategies that is very different for small businesses. I think the other thing that I like to talk to small business owners about is that you do want to be ahead of the pack. You want to give fresh ideas and fresh perspectives, but you don't want to be so far ahead that the cost of educating your client is great. And I have a perfect example of that. We were high definition before most of the TV stations in this country were high definition. We decided we needed to be at a quality level that was significantly higher for our customers. I had a really hard time explaining to my customers why they needed that. Because high definition back then was like, well, why would you do that? Right? And so I was so far ahead that I had to spend a lot of time. And the cost of the equipment at that point was much greater than it is today. So I bought in when it was expensive. Now I've learned the lessons. There's a right time to be ahead of the pack, and you want to be just a little bit ahead, but not so far ahead that you don't have the ability to bring other people along. And that's something that's different because big businesses want to be way out there and they've got a lot of money and a lot of resources to spend on R&D. So that's a different kind of a strategy for a small business.
Yeah, a couple of things there. I read the section in your book, the Small Business Big Thinking book, about that story that you bought expensive editing equipment and now you can just download that from Apple, right? It's on your iPhone. So that curve moves pretty fast. And you also said, I think, that your editing equipment turned all the people blue and made them into Smurfs, right?
We were so far ahead of the pack with nonlinear editing that we were a beta test site. And that was the same year that George Lucas was buying it to edit his films. And they needed beta test sites. And I was like, oh, how exciting. We can be the first. And it was miserable because they sent out a new release of the software and literally turned everything blue. It took us days, to get everything back to normal. And those are things that, and that's not a bad thing for a small business to be looking at, is where are you in that timeline of, being, pushing the edge, but not too far. I think the other thing that I think as a small business you need to do is that you need to be much more careful about who those clients are. I talk about, when to love clients and when to leave them. And there are times when, people walk in your door and you should not take those people as a client. They will cost you time and money, and it's not work you want to do. Now, it's hard because you still have to pay all of the expenses. But I think being really choosy about clients and understanding who you really can serve and what you can do for them in the long term makes you far more profitable.
The other thing I love about what you said was that an example of a strategy is take care of small customers because they could become big. That's brilliant. And you can embed that as a strategy, as opposed to strategy being something you can only get to do when you've done a $400,000 MBA at
Exactly.
Harvard or Wharton. So tell us about strategy. How should small businesses think about strategy?
Well, I think most of them don't.
Yeah.
I'm going to be,
Yeah.
honest about that. I think, and you have to understand that business owners are so busy sometimes that they're taking what comes at them as opposed to really clearly defining what the lane is that they want to be in. And then building out, so you start with a service. So, for example, in my business, we started with shooting and editing very simple projects. And our strategy was to learn from that, to get our costing right, to make contacts, to understand what other things people needed, and then to project out, okay, we've gotten good at this. What's our next step? What are those next things that we want to do? And to put timelines on them. I said by the time I was in business, I wanted to have my first big customer within the first year. Then my goal was, okay, that one I got, but now how do we use the tools that we put in place to get that customer to attract another customer? The strategy is finding what works for you and then replicating that and finding like customers that you are going to sell to. So I think when I say, people take what comes through the door, I think they don't really think about the kind of work they want, the infrastructure that they need to build. And in some cases, it's not that much. And in some cases, like in my case, the infrastructure is much larger. And then how are you going to touch base with those people? How are you going to connect with them? And then once you've connected with them, what can you offer them that somebody else can't? It's really thinking through that whole process and then also having procedures in place for how you do things. And I think sometimes people will have a strategy, but they don't necessarily have the tools and the processes in place to carry that out. They are more, some smaller entities they are in luck. They kind of luck themselves into doing things. And that's okay. But then you have to deconstruct that. What was it that you did so that you can apply it somewhere else?
Yeah. Yeah. The fancy word for that is replication.
Mhm.
I've done it. Hey, great. Now, how do I
Yeah.
do it again and again
How
and
do you
again
do
and
it
again?
again? There
Yeah.
you go.
And then you need process.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the areas that you look at for small business to grow is partnering. And you have a lot of warnings about that. You got to think hard about it in advance. And you even suggested a prenup, which is an interesting analogy. So tell us about
I
that.
created that actually, the
Good.
business prenup.
Yeah.
And truthfully, I think it's really important for people to understand that, when businesses do things, we don't always do things the right way. We don't. There are things we don't know. And in the case of partnering up, I had a partner when I originally started the business, and I really thought that I needed one. He was more technical. I was more creative in sales. And I thought, what a great partnership that would be. We had freelanced together. But what I discovered after we got into the business was that there came a point in time when we weren't headed the same direction. We weren't on the same path. And I have seen this time and time again with businesses. They go into partnership because they think they need something, right? And maybe you do, but maybe you don't. And so I created this idea of not just looking at the structure and who's going to own what percent and, what are the agreements you have in place, but really getting down to the nitty gritty of, is this a person that has the same values, the integrity, the work ethic that you have, the vision that you have for this company? In my case, this person did not have the vision that I had. And in the early years of the business, we didn't grow significantly the way I would have liked to because he didn't want to hire people. He didn't want to give up that control of any aspect of the business. Well, you can't grow if you aren't doing that. And so We actually ended up, I ended up buying out my partner. And then that takes a little time to recover from, and then you can start to grow. But I think that was something that was a really good lesson for me, in that you have to pay attention to more than just the business aspects, because you will spend a lot of time with the people that you partner with. And in fact, you spend more time with them than you probably do your family in those early days. So you have to really have a great relationship. It's like a marriage. And when you break up, it's like a divorce, you know?
So one of the ways that I always think about small business is to believe that it can perform better than big business. And I got a little bit about that from, there's a database which I've mentioned before on the podcast called Hidden Champions. It's German based, but I think the principles are the same. And he looked at small growing businesses and he found that they could have higher profit margins. They had more revenue per employee. They retained their employees longer. They retained their customers longer. They were better at reinvestment and R&D and innovation. So do you think that's generalizable for small businesses, that they can perform better in some aspects?
You have to look at the kind of entity you're talking. Are we talking about a retail outlet, or are we talking, because, different kinds of businesses have different models. But I would tell you that I agree with much of that. I benchmarked my business against a business that was doing twice the revenue that we were doing, but had like 2/3 more people than we had. So when that revenue per employee, I think is a really good benchmark of how well run a small business can be. I think the other thing about that is that smaller businesses take less time when it comes to innovating, because we don't have all the gatekeepers that larger businesses have. You don't have, you've got to go to this committee and you've got to get sign off, and we look at something and we do our due diligence, but we aren't paralyzed by that because we have so many stakeholders. And so I think we can get to that innovation much faster. And frankly, that's why you see a lot of these smaller entities who have developed something, and they are a great target for a buyout of a big company that wants that innovation, right? And there's where you get serial entrepreneurs, because those people then go off and start another business.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of innovation is that way. It's got to come from outside the big businesses because they can't move fast enough. So trying to segue from there, one of the things that you say in your book is about being operationally in the trenches. So we've talked about all this innovation and all of this customer relationships, but you've got to be super efficient in the trenches at operations. And that's a place where you can automate using technology. In our last episode, we talked to a private equity firm that said, I can buy a big business and can always make its operations more efficient by automating them. Is that what you mean by being in the trenches, or can you do it all without automation?
I think you have to have systems. You definitely need to have systems, and you need to have procedures. And operationally excellent to me means that you have looked at, from start to finish, whatever that operation is, you have looked at every aspect of it, from what you're buying to the people, to the tools you've given them, to automating, which I think is huge. A lot of small businesses think they don't need the technology. They think they're too small, or they're afraid of technology. But I think that often the really innovative small businesses are more technologically advanced because they see the value, and frankly, because we don't have as many hands. There have been times in my business where I've said, gosh, do I need to hire a person to do X over here? Or can I put some tools in place here, some automation? And almost every single time we've chosen to put automation in. There's a cost to that, but it's not that ongoing expense but you need people too. But I think, when it comes down to smaller entities, there are things we can learn from big businesses, and I think there are things that they can learn from us. I think often big businesses will track every single aspect of something, and most of that does not have value. I think smaller businesses are good at identifying what are those key elements that need to be considered and tracked. And the rest we kind of go, don't need that. You don't need to be tracking some of those things. But there are things on both sides. But to your point, in working with large companies, I can tell you I have seen some are operationally very efficient, and there are some that trying to get anything done is very difficult.
Yeah, yeah. So, CK, one of the things that you do for us is share your expertise through writing books, and I read the one about small business, big thinking. That's super valuable, and you've touched on some of those points today. You have a new one coming out, but it's not till next year.
Yes.
But I noticed the title was Small Business, Big Opportunity. So we love that too. Can you share anything about the upcoming book without giving too much away?
Sure. No, I'm happy to share. So it's Small Business, Big Success, proven strategies to beat the odds, because we know the odds are against us, right? And grow a great business. And what I've done is I've kind of gone back in my history. And so I've looked at success in 4 areas. And one is success at startup. And that's probably critical because, let's face it, if you don't make it through that, you don't get to the rest of it. And I find it fascinating that even though there are more resources today for businesses that are starting up, we still have a very similar failure rate to what there was 10 years ago. Now think about that. Why, but we have more. So I talk about the things that I think are important at startup. And then I talk about success at operations, because I think a lot of people are really good at that initial thing. But then when they start to really focus on their operations, they don't put a lot of the tools in place that they need, so that employees, as they're hiring them, know what needs to be done. And so I look at operations, and then I look at growth, and growth for everybody is different. And so I look at what are some of the ways that you can really grow your business by stepping outside of what your traditional offering is and offering other things. And then the part that I really love is success at stepping out. And I think that that is something that people don't often consider. I mean, you started this business, you grew it, you love it. Why would you think about that? Well, it's really important that you need to think about what is going to be your exit, because that actually will kind of guide you in how you grow it, right? And how you operate it. And I've been in business now 35 years, and that's the place where I'm at, is looking at, okay, how do you successfully step out and onto the next adventure? And that's a real hard one for some people. So I think those are the areas that those are those buckets that I put it into. And I'm really excited because through my contacts with many of the business associations, I've been able to interview business owners and experts from all over the country, people who are much smarter than I am in many ways. And they've been really open in sharing their stories. And I just think stories are a great way for people to learn.
Well, that book title is listed on Amazon now, so we can add that link and people can pre-register it for it. We've got some of your earlier books we can link to. We can point people to your website. Is there another place that you like to have people find you, LinkedIn or anything like that?
Well, there is my Cynthia K. Biz site, which is fun because that's kind of the communications consulting piece of the business. What I've discovered over the years is, through the media production part of my business, is that a lot of people are very afraid of presenting and speaking and communicating. And so I've developed a list of seminars and boot camps that I do for businesses that help people not just be better in front of the camera, but be better at communicating. And I think that's a skill that right now we really need to ramp up. I think given what's happened with people working from home and people being somewhat isolated, communication skills are really important. We need to pay attention because you can be really great at what you do, but you have to be able to articulate it.
Well, you're great at that. And Cynthia, thank you for everything you do for small business. You're a very generous person, and congratulations on all you've achieved in your business, which is phenomenal.
Well, thank you. And I so appreciate the conversation and the great questions. Got me thinking a little too.
Well, maybe you can come back next year when your new book is published and we can talk about that in more detail.
I would love to. Thank you so much.
Good. Thank you, CK.
This has been another episode of the Value Creators Podcast. Thanks for listening. You can visit thevaluecreators.com for links and resources related to this episode, and check out hunterhastings.com for more content on entrepreneurial business management based on value creation principles.